The wedding was 22 days out when Toby cancelled it on the dock in front of my whole crew and called it the kindest thing he could do for me. He had already signed my father's quota shares over to the woman he marries in September. He said it on the dock in front of 9 people at 4 in the afternoon in the rain while we were pumping the hold. That detail matters, and I will keep coming back to it, because a man who wants to end an engagement privately has 364 other days and a truck. He chose the dock. He chose 4 o'clock, which is when the Austria, the Bright Ruth, and the Cordwainer are all tied up at the same float, and there is a wall of people within 30 feet, and he chose to do it standing above me on the rail while I was down in the pen with a hose. He said, "Greta, I can't do September." I said we were doing May. He said, "I can't do May either." And then he did the part he had clearly written down, because Toby Reyerson has never once produced a complete sentence under pressure in his life, and this one had a shape to it. He said, "You've got the season, you've got your dad's affairs, you're carrying too much, and I'd rather be the guy who says it now than the guy who watches you drown in it. This is the kindest thing I can do for you." 9 people heard the word kindest. Mickey Saris, who has run the engine room on that boat since 1998 and who is 68 years old, was standing 4 feet behind him with a wrench in his hand, and he said, without any particular heat, "Toby, you want to say that inside?" Toby said this was between him and me. Mickey said, "Then you're standing in a strange place for it." And Wanda Pell, our harbor master, who was up on the ramp with a clipboard, did not say anything at all, but she wrote something down, and I have since seen that page, and what she wrote was the time, 4:11. I want to tell you what I did, because people expect a scene, and there wasn't one. I finished pumping the hold. It took 19 more minutes, and I did it properly, and then I coiled the hose, and then I went up the ladder and stood on the float in the rain in front of my fiancé and said one thing, which was it my father's affairs or yours? And his face did a thing I had never seen it do in 6 years, which was nothing at all, for about a second and a half. And that second and a half is the reason there is a story here. If he had looked hurt, I would have believed him. I would have gone home and cried and told myself I was too much, and 84,000 pounds of my father's quota would still be sitting in a holding company in Anacortes. The logbook is where I found it. My father, Erik Lindqvist, kept a daily log for 31 years in the same kind of green hardbound ledger, 1 page a day, weather at the top left, engine hours at the top right, and then whatever else he thought a person might want to know later. He wrote in them at the galley table at the end of every day at sea, and at the kitchen table at the end of every day ashore, including the days when nothing happened, including Christmas, including the day my mother left in 1998, which reads, in full, wind NE20, gusting 30, snow on the ridge. Bought fuel. She has gone to Ketchikan. Boat is fine. There are 31 of those books, and they were in a cabinet in the wheelhouse, and after he died in November, I did not touch them for 5 months, because I am a coward about exactly one thing. He was diagnosed with ALS in the January before he died. Bulbar onset, which means it goes for the speech and the swallow first, and the hands later, and it took him 22 months, and it took his voice at about month 9. I want to say clearly what that period was actually like, because there is a version of this story where I am a devoted daughter and it is not accurate. I fished the whole time. He wanted the boat to keep working, and I wanted to not be in that house, and both of those things were true at once, and I was gone 6 weeks at a stretch, and Anneke Dorr, who kept the books for the co-op, and who had known him since she was a kid, went by 3 times a week with groceries. She really did that. Nobody made her. That is the part I have had to hold on to through everything else, because it would be so much easier if she had not. And Toby was on the boat with me, and he was good to my father. He drove him to Anchorage twice for the clinic, and at the funeral he stood at the back and shook 200 hands so I would not have to. There are 4 things about my father that I would want a stranger to know. He would not let anybody on that boat work a deck in a hood, because he said a hood is a thing that stops you hearing the one noise that matters. And to this day I cannot put a hood up on the water without hearing him. He taught me to splice line when I was 7 by making me do it left-handed first, on the theory that if I could do it badly with the wrong hand, I would never be frightened of doing it well with the right one, which is either genius or nonsense, and I have never decided. In 2011, he ran 9 hours out of his way in weather to tow in a boat belonging to a man who had sued him in 2004, and when I asked him about it, he said he'd have done it, and I said, would he? And my father said, doesn't matter, I would. And in the last spring, when he could not talk, he used to write things on a whiteboard for me, and most of it was practical. And one morning I came in and it said, in letters that were already going, you do not have to be here every day. I want to be exact about this. He was releasing me, and I took it, and I have to live with the fact that I was glad. So when I opened those books in April, I was not looking for a crime. I was looking for my father, and I found him. And then on the page for the 11th of March of his last year, I found something else, which is that the handwriting had changed. Not the words. The words are fine. They are the same words, wind and hours and what the price of cod was. The letters had gone. His hand had been failing for months by then, and the log shows it like a graph. And I sat on the floor of the wheelhouse and turned pages forward one at a time and watched my father's handwriting come apart between January and September. And then on the 29th of September there is a page that is 4 words and a scrawl, and then the book stops, and there is nothing at all for the last 7 weeks of his life. And the reason my stomach went was not grief. It was that I had, 10 days earlier, in a folder from the estate lawyer, seen a quota transfer application with my father's signature on it, notarized, dated the 14th of October. Sig Bramm has run this co-op since 2009, and if you have never been in a fishing town, you will not understand what that means. So here it is quickly. Federal quota is a share of a catch limit. It is issued to a person, and it is transferable, and it is worth real money, and it is the entire retirement plan of every independent boat in this harbor, because none of us have another one. The co-op is where transfers get processed, and where loans get arranged, and where a man who is too sick to fish goes to ask what his options are. Sig is 62. He wears a fleece with the co-op logo on it. He remembers the name of every kid in this town, and he has never in his life raised his voice at anybody. He runs the annual meeting like a church service, and between 2016 and last year, 11 quota holders in Tannis Bay died or stopped fishing, and 9 of those 11 quota accounts moved, within 18 months, into 3 holding entities registered in Washington state, all of which share a mailing address with a processor called Kestrel Cold Storage, and Sig Bramm's daughter has been Kestrel's compliance officer since 2017. Not one of those transfers is illegal on its face. That is the thing. Every one of them is a lawful transfer, signed, notarized, filed with the Federal Registry, processed correctly. What I could not do anything with in April was the only fact I actually had, which is that on the 14th of October, my father could not hold a pen. So I went to a lawyer in Anchorage, a very good one, and she read for 40 minutes and then said the thing that lawyers say, which is, your problem is not the truth, it is the forum. She explained that the co-op's membership agreement has a binding arbitration clause, that arbitration would be seated in Seattle, that the arbitrator would be selected from a panel the co-op contributes to, that discovery would be limited, and that the whole thing would cost me somewhere north of $90,000 and about 3 years. She said, "You are a deckhand with a mortgage on a boat." I said, "I know." She said, "And if you file, the first thing that happens is the co-op is on notice, and the second thing that happens is that anything in that office you have not already got, you are never getting." So I did not file. I want that clearly understood by anybody who is about to ask why I did not just go to a lawyer, because I did go to a lawyer on the 3rd of April, and she gave me correct advice, and the correct advice was that the door was locked. What she also said, on the way out, almost as an afterthought, is the reason I am able to tell you the rest of this. She said, "The transfer applications are federal. They are not the co-op's paper. You can order them yourself." Anneke Dorr came down to the boat in April, 11 days after the dock. She came at 7 in the evening with a foil tray, which is the way things are said here, and she stood on the float and asked if she could come aboard, and I said yes, because I wanted to see her face, and she cried before she sat down. She said, "I need you to know I never wanted this." She said, "It happened in a way where by the time either of us noticed, it had already happened." She said she had told Toby 3 times that he had to tell me properly and privately. And I believe that. Actually, I have always believed that. And then she sat in my father's galley, at the table where he wrote 31 years of logs, and she said the sentence that I have thought about more than anything else anybody said to me that entire year. She said, "I'm not going to pretend I don't love him, but Greta, I sat with your dad 3 days a week for 2 years and you were on the water, and I never once said a word about that to anybody, and I'm not saying it now to hurt you. I'm saying it because you're looking at me like I stole something, and I want you to know what I actually did." And it landed the way only a true thing can land, because she had done that, and I had not, and my father had spent his last winter with a woman who brought him soup while his daughter was 6 weeks out on the Bering Sea, being useful somewhere else. I did not have a line. I sat there in my own galley, and I had nothing. And I want to be honest about that, because I have given you a version of myself that always has an answer, and that woman does not exist. What I said eventually was, "Did you notarize anything for him?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "You're a notary. It's on the co-op's website. Did you notarize anything for my dad?" And she stopped crying. That is the whole tale. She did not deny it, and she did not confirm it. She said, "I think I should go." And she left the tray, and I sat there for a long time. And then I went up to the wheelhouse and got the logbook for that year and put it on the table next to the tray. and that is the moment the thing stopped being about a wedding. I did not sleep that night, and at about 2 in the morning I did the thing I had been refusing to do since the dock, which is that I got out the 6 years of my engagement and went through it like a file. Toby proposed in 2019, in October, which I had always found romantic, and which I now know was 11 days after the first of those transfer applications was notarized. He was the one who suggested we not do a prenup, and the reason he gave, which I repeated to my father proudly, was that he did not want a marriage with a hedge in it. He was the one who suggested we get married in September rather than May, and September is after the co-op's fiscal year closes. I am aware that this is the kind of reasoning that turns a person into somebody who cannot be talked to. I am aware that if I am wrong about even one of those, I am a woman on a boat at 2 in the morning building a case against a man for the crime of proposing in autumn. I checked all 3 against the file in the morning, and I was not wrong about any of them, and I want to be honest that I was disappointed, because there is a version of that night where I got to be crazy and he got to be sad, and I would have taken it. Mickey came down the next morning with 2 coffees and looked at the tray and said, "Foil or glass?" I said foil. He said foil's guilt, glass, she wants it back. Then he sat down and said, "How bad?" I said I did not know yet, and he said, "Greta, your dad hired me in 1998, and he paid me in cash for 4 years because he couldn't afford the paperwork, and then when he could, he backdated my pension contributions out of his own pocket and never mentioned it. Whatever you're doing, I've got until it's done." I sent for every transfer application. This is the least dramatic paragraph in this story, and it is the one that actually won, so I'm going to be specific about it. Federal quota transfers go through a regional office, and the applications are agency records, and there is a request process, and it is a form, and it costs money by the page and nothing else. I requested every transfer application filed against 11 Tannis Bay quota accounts between 2016 and last year, plus my father's account history in full. It took 4 months, 1 denial in part, 1 appeal, and $390, and Mickey paid for half of it and has never let me pay him back. And what came back in August was 260 pages, and it contained 3 things. First, my father's transfer application, dated the 14th of October, notarized 84,000 pounds of cod quota to an entity called Northline Holdings, with a stated consideration of $11,000, which is roughly 9% of what that quota was worth that year. Second, the notary block, which carries the name and commission number of Anneke Dorr and a signature. Third, and this is the one nobody saw coming, including me, the same package contained the applications for the other 8 accounts, and 6 of those 8 had been witnessed by the same deck boss, and the deck boss was Toby Reyerson, and the earliest of those was dated in 2019, which is 2 years before my father was diagnosed, and 3 years before Toby ever said one word to me about a wedding. He had been doing it for 6 years. I had it laid out on the galley table for a week before I understood what I was looking at, and when I did, I had to go and stand on the back deck in the rain, because the story I had been telling myself was that a weak man had done a bad thing at the end and then had not been able to look at me. That was wrong. That was flattering to everybody, including me. What was actually true is that I had been engaged for 4 of the 6 years in which the man I was going to marry had been carrying a pen for Sig Bramm, and that the wedding was not called off because he fell in love with Anneke. It was called off because Erik was the notary, and I was about to become his wife, and a wife can be made to testify or not, depending which state you are in and which lawyer you ask, and neither of them wanted to find out. The kindest thing he could do for me, he said that on a dock in the rain, and 9 people heard him, and I have not been able to stop hearing it since. And then I built the last piece, which took 2 more months, and which is the only part of this I am actually proud of. My father's neurology clinic in Anchorage keeps a dated functional score at every visit. I am his personal representative, so those records are mine. They score hand strength and fine motor function on a scale at every visit with a date. And on the 22nd of September, he scored a 1 out of 5 on the right hand. On the 9th of October, he scored a 0. 0 means he could not sign his name. The blessing is the first Sunday in May. Every boat in the harbor dresses. The fleet runs out past the point in a line. A priest and a Lutheran pastor and, since 2014, an elder from the village both do a piece, and there is a wreath for the ones lost, and then everybody comes back and eats in the co-op hall. 400 people. It is the single most important day of the year in this town, and it is the day the co-op holds its annual meeting in the same hall after the food, because that is the one day everybody is already there. Sig Bramm has opened that meeting for 16 years, so I asked Wanda Pell for the floor under the harbor master's item, which is a real item on that agenda and which nobody has used for anything in a decade. And Wanda said, "How long do you need?" And I said 11 minutes, and Wanda said, "You've got 15, and I'll be standing at the back door." I did it in order, the way the lawyer in Anchorage had told me to do it, if I ever did anything at all, which is documents first, names last. First the logbook. I put it on the table, and I opened it to January, and I held it up, and then I turned to March, and then June, and then September, and I did not say anything at all while I did that. And 400 people watched a man's handwriting fall apart across a room in about 40 seconds. Then the clinic scores, read out with the dates, 1 out of 5 on the 22nd of September, 0 on the 9th of October. Then the transfer application, dated the 14th of October, with a signature on it. And I said, 5 days after a doctor wrote down that my father could not sign his name, my father signed his name. Nobody made a sound. A woman from the processor's side said, "Consideration was paid. There are canceled checks." I said there were $11,000 of them, against Quota that traded that October at $119,000, and that I had brought the state's own landing values, so nobody had to take my word for the number. Sig said, "Quota values swing." I said, "Not by a factor of 11 in 1 month, Sig, and if they did, this hall would have burned down about it." Somebody laughed and then stopped, in the way people do when they realize laughing has picked a side. Then I did the other 8, by account, by date, by witness. And when I got to the 6th one with Toby's name on it, a man called Dutch Halloran, who is 79 and whose brother's Quota was one of the 9, stood up out of his chair and had to be got hold of by 2 people. Sig Bramm said, from the front, in the reasonable voice, "Greta, every one of those transfers was processed lawfully, and I'd invite anybody to bring a complaint through the proper channel." And I said the thing I had written on the back of a fuel receipt in September and carried since. I said, "Sig, you built the proper channel. That's what the file shows. It doesn't show a thief. It shows a man who spent 9 years making sure the only door out of this room leads to his office. Anneke Dorr stood up in the 4th row. She was shaking so badly she had to hold the chair in front of her, and she said, "I notarized it." Toby said, "Anneke." And she said louder, "I notarized 11 of them, and I went to the house, and I put the pen in his hand, and Sig told me it was a formality, and I have known since the 10th of October that it was not." Then she sat down and put her head in her hands, and her mother, who was 81 and who was sitting beside her, did not touch her. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. The determination came down in October, 17 months later, because federal agencies do not care about your feelings or your season. The regional office found the 14th of October transfer void for want of capacity, and voided 6 of the other 8, and referred the file, and the criminal case against Sig Bramm went to a grand jury in the spring on wire fraud and conspiracy counts, and he took a plea 11 months after that and is doing 41 months in Sheridan. Kestrel Cold Storage unwound the holdings under a consent agreement rather than defend them, which tells you they had lawyers who could read. Toby lost his deck boss job in the first week, lost his position on the co-op board, was charged as a co-conspirator, cooperated, took a misdemeanor and 18 months probation, and works on a tender out of Kodiak now, which is a real job and a smaller one. He has never contacted me, not once, and I have decided that is the closest he can get to dignity, and I am prepared to let him have it. Anneke Dorr surrendered her notary commission, testified for 2 days without immunity because she refused to ask for it, was charged and got a deferred adjudication, and moved to Sitka. She and Toby did not marry. I do not know whether that is sad, and I have stopped trying to decide. The regional office changed its own rules 11 months later and now requires a physician attestation of capacity on any transfer where the holder has a filed medical hardship, which is 2 extra sentences on a form, and which would have stopped all 9 of these. And the notice in the Federal Register does not mention Tannis Bay and does not mention my father, and I have a printout of it in the wheelhouse anyway. The co-op's membership voted out the arbitration clause in the same meeting that elected a new board, 41-6, and I would love to know who the 6 were, and Wanda Pell will go to her grave not telling me. 2 of the 3 holding entities were dissolved. Kestrel's compliance officer, who is Sig's daughter, and who I have decided I do not have an opinion about, resigned in the spring and works for the state now, on the other side of it, which I am told happens more than you would think. Dutch Halloran got his brother's quota back and sold it and bought a house for his granddaughter. 4 of the 9 families got theirs back. 2 of the accounts have been resold twice and are gone, and 3 are still in it. And I got my father's £84,000 back in a determination letter that I read standing at the mailbox in the rain, and then went and sat in the truck for a while, because a letter is a strange shape for a man's whole life to come home in. Here is the part nobody warned me about. The quota came back to the estate, and the estate is a boat with a mortgage on it, and a girl who is now 36, and 84,000 pounds of cod quota is not money, it is an obligation. You have to fish it or lease it, you have to insure it, you have to crew it. So I own the Austria outright now, and I owe the bank $211,000, and I have to go out and get it every year, and there is no version of my life where I sit down. And in March, at the reorganized co-op, they elected me chair which I did not stand for and which Mickey nominated me for from the floor while making direct eye contact with me, and I took it because the alternative was Dutch, and Dutch is 79 and would have run it like a grudge. So now I sit at the front of that hall on the first Sunday in May, and in my first year a transfer came across the desk from a family in a bad way that would have been good for me personally, in a small and completely legal way that nobody would ever have noticed, and I recused myself and wrote down why in a green hardbound ledger, 1 page, dated, with the weather at the top left, because that is what my father did with days he did not want to think about later. I keep his thermos on the boat. It is green and the seal is gone, and it does not hold heat for more than an hour, and every single season Mickey says, that thing's a hazard, and every single season I say, it's fine, and that is the entire conversation. Twice a year for 9 years, and on the mornings when I do not want to go out, which are more than I would like to admit, I fill it anyway, and I take it down the ramp, and the harbor is dark, and the water is doing what it does, and I think about a man on a dock in the rain telling 9 people he was being kind to me. He was not wrong that I was carrying too much. He was wrong about who put it there. So here is what I want to know from you, since you have been on that float with me the whole way. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next